Coming up on New Day at Arirang. South Korea is expected to see a rise in new daily infections around the 5,000 mark on Wednesday. Amid this, the government has vowed to expand compensation to more under-18s who suffer from vaccine side effects and mental distress. The U.S. has requested to convene a meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss North Korea's area of missile launches this year. AFP says the meeting could be held behind closed doors on the 20th. And global oil prices climbed to their highest since 2014 on Tuesday as investors worried about possible supply disruption after attacks in the Middle East added to an already tight outlook.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on January 19th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom.
And I'm Kim Mo-gen. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
Now, our top story this morning, South Korea could see more than 5,000 new COVID-19 cases on Wednesday as Omicron spreads rapidly in regions outside the capital. Despite this, the government is looking to loosen vaccine pass rules and add more exemptions.
Yes, for more COVID updates, we have our COVID-19 correspondent Kim Yeon-seung here in the studio with us. Good morning, Yeon-seung.
Good morning, Mo-gen.
So like always, let's start with the daily infection cases. We heard that it's expected to go up today.
Exactly. So Wednesday's cases are expected to top 5,000. Up to 9 p.m. Tuesday, there were 4,846 new COVID-19 cases reported nationwide, jumping about 1,500 from the day before. It's also the first time in 3 weeks that more than 4,000 infections have been reported on a Tuesday night.
And do officials know what exactly is fueling this spike?
Well, Omicron is spreading rapidly in regions outside the capital, so that may be feeding into the recent rise in infections. It's already dominant in Gwangju City, where more than 80% of their analyzed case samples are Omicron. There are also reports of Omicron tipping over 50% of the local infections in Jeollabuk-do and Jeollanam-do provinces as well. So Omicron may have already taken over in those regions. Recently, infections outside the capital area have contributed to around 40% of local cases, an obvious increase, seeing as the figure reported early this month was around 30%. The government said that if daily infections rise to the 5,000s for several days straight, they're going to get ready to shift their medical and prevention response in a way that's more adaptable to Omicron. They haven't announced the specifics to how the response will change, but it may not be long before we see these changes because Omicron is expected to become dominant nationwide by this weekend.
So, Yeon-seung, speaking of government response, we heard that the government has removed the need for vaccine passes in certain areas such as, theaters and study rooms. So are we expecting more changes in the future?
Exactly. So that rule actually went into effect yesterday, as you know, and now we may expect some more tweaks to the vaccine pass rule. Son Young-rae, a senior health ministry official, said Tuesday that the government is looking to provide more exceptions to the vaccine pass rule. That announcement is due later this week. Currently, exemptions include people who have already recovered from COVID-19, those who couldn't complete their regimen due to adverse reactions, the immunocompromised, or those who have been recommended by their doctors to not get vaccinated. There have been some requests regarding adding pregnant women to the exemption list, but the government seemed quite adamant against making that decision. However, certain people with specific health conditions will be added to the list, so we'll just have to wait and see until the end of this week to see what changes will be made.
Okay, let's turn to vaccine passes for minors because there's still some confusion over whether 12 to 18-year-olds will be exempt. So do we have any updates on that front?
Right, so let me clear up the backstory a little bit up for you, Mark. So the government's original plan was to enforce vaccine passes for those aged 12 to 18 starting from March. But since the Seoul Administrative Court decided to suspend vaccine passes for underage citizens, the government is looking to appeal because health authorities still remain adamant that vaccine passes are needed to protect minors, especially at venues like PC rooms, singing rooms, restaurants, and cafes. In fact, The government continues to encourage teenage vaccination and has even offered to pay compensation to those who suffer from side effects. Education Minister Yoon has said in a government briefing on Tuesday that the government will pay up to 5 million Korean won or $4,200 to 12 to 18-year-olds who show serious adverse reactions within 90 days of inoculation. The government is also trying to help out with students' mental health and who are dealing with the so-called corona blues. The Ministry of Education in 2022 will allocate more than $300 million to help set up programs that provide support to students whose mental health has been affected by the pandemic. Up to 3 million won, or roughly $2,500 will also be offered in assistance to students who try to self-harm or suffered debilitating depression due to the pandemic.
Well, that sounds like some relief for some of us. Yunsing, as always, thank you so much for your report. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Now, moving on to the global state of affairs in regards to this pandemic, the head of the World Health Organization has reiterated his warning that the COVID-19 pandemic is, quote, nowhere near over.
Well, his grim outlook coming as many countries continue to log record daily infections due to the rampant spread of the Omicron variant. Kim Hyo-sun has more.
The WHO chief is warning the pandemic is far from over, highlighting once again that the Omicron variant cannot be taken lightly. While the variant seems to cause less serious symptoms, he warned the sheer number of people contracting the virus is putting a significant strain on public healthcare systems.
Omicron continues to sweep the world. Last week, there were more than 18 million reported cases. The number of deaths remains stable for the moment, but we're concerned about the impact Omicron is having on already exhausted health workers and overburdened health systems. In some countries, cases seem to have peaked, which gives hope that the worst of this latest wave is done with, but no country is out of the woods yet.
Some experts have also warned that allowing the virus to spread increases the chance of new variants emerging. Against such a backdrop, France reported over 464,000 new cases on Tuesday. This is the country's highest tally since the onset of the pandemic. Germany is also grappling with a rapid surge, with the health minister urging the public to stay vigilant. The German government has decided to change its COVID-19 related regulations, granting shorter immunity status for individuals who have contracted the virus and fully recovered. Under the new rules, the recovery status expires after 3 months, shortened from the previous 6 months. In Asia, Japan hit a new record of over 32,000 new cases on Tuesday. The Japanese government continues to mull over declaring a quasi-state of emergency for Tokyo and 3 nearby prefectures to try and contain the spread, warning that new infections are spreading at a, quote, unprecedented rate. While America's average of new daily cases has dropped slightly, hovering at around 790,000, hospitalizations have soared to a new high of over 150,000 patients. That's a 54% increase from 2 weeks ago. Nearly 2,000 Americans are dying of COVID-19 each day, with the majority of them being unvaccinated. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In other news, the U.S. has called a meeting of the UN Security Council on North Korea after the regime conducted 4 missile tests in the space of 3 weeks. Citing an unnamed source, AFP reported a closed-door meeting is expected to take place on Thursday, adding that the countries including Albania, Britain, France, Ireland, and Mexico had expressed support. The U.S. says it continues to take North Korea's missile program very seriously. Asked if Washington is downplaying the North's recent moves, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said that the U.S. has tangible commitments to the defense of South Korea, and the launches are a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. He did not elaborate on specific details of the latest launch.
So, a few days ago, North Korea appears to have tested the same type of tactical guided missiles it launched back in 2019 and the year after that, namely the KN-24. The South Korean military says it has the capabilities to detect and also intercept this kind of projectile. Bae-eun-ji with this report.
A photo released by North Korea's state-run media on Tuesday shows that what the regime fired the day before appears to be its KN-24 missile. The North's KCNA reported that the regime conducted a test of its tactical guided missiles and claimed that the two missiles precisely hit an island target in the East Sea. Tactical guided missiles are short-range weapons used in the immediate combat area. The KN-24 resembles the U.S. Army's tactical missile system and is typically launched from what's called a TEL, or a wheel transporter erector launcher. It's known to be able to fly on a complicated trajectory to evade interception.
KN-24 missiles can maneuver easily, making them difficult to be detected by ballistic missile defense radars. So with the defense radar South Korea currently has, intercepting this missile would be tricky.
This marks the fourth time that the North has launched this type of missile. It last fired the KN-24 in March 2020, after testing it twice in August 2019. But regarding the latest launch, South Korea said it has the ability to detect and intercept it.
Our military has the capability to detect and intercept this weapon, and we're continuing our efforts to strengthen our defense systems.
Seoul's military had earlier confirmed on Monday that the North launched two projectiles that appear to be ballistic missiles from an airfield in its capital city of Pyongyang. It said that the missiles flew about 380 kilometers at a maximum altitude of 42 kilometers. The latest missile was the fourth time this year that the North had tested some type of projectile. The previous two launches involved what the North claimed to have been hypersonic missiles, which are capable of maneuvering at very high speeds. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. South Korea's central bank last week hiked its base interest rate to pre-pandemic levels as policymakers tried to get a handle on soaring inflation as well as skyrocketing household debt. Now, the decision by the Bank of Korea to up the rate from 1% to 1.25% was widely expected by analysts and was the BOK's third increase in just half a year. Now, South Korea, it must be stressed, isn't the only country attempting a similar tactic, as central banks around the world, including in the US, the Federal Reserve, are trying to balance rates in a bid to tame inflation.
And inflation is of particular concern for South Korea. Recently released data showed consumer prices in South Korea in 2021 rose by 2.5%, a high not seen here in 10 years. For more on the economic currents affecting South Korea as we seem to be coming out of the other side of the pandemic, we connect to Professor Oh Jun-seok of Sookmyung Women's University of Korea. Good morning, Professor.
Morning.
So, Professor, how do the upward changes in the base rate effect affect regular people? So, for instance, how can it be felt in things like mortgage payments, the credit card bills, and their savings?
Interest changes have multiple effects in an economy. Simply speaking, as interest rate refers to the price you pay for your consumption or debt. So, interest rate hike implies price increase of your consumption. Bank of Korea expects consumer price to rise at around 3% for a considerable time. In a way to curb down this kind of inflation pressure, BOK give a market signal to interest rate hike. As a result, people tend to be more selective in their consumption and to save and invest more for a rainy day. Commercial banks are raising interest rate on deposit following the central bank's rate hike. Inflation pressure could eventually be controlled as consumption deflates. Interest rate hike means extra burden you pay for your debts. When you got mortgage, no wonder your payment will be increased as mortgage and credit card have strings with variable interest rate. BOK said at the annual interest rate payment by household as a result of this kind of reference rate hike will amount to $2.7 billion.
Now, some economists argue that playing around with interest rates isn't necessarily the best way or the only way to try and tame inflation. Some of them say while it's a medicine of sorts, it isn't always necessarily the correct medicine in these situations. What side of the argument do you come down on?
Yes, it is true there is no universal right or wrong way to control inflation. But it is certain inflation should be kept under control in any circumstances. Once inflation triggers to boil up, depending upon the prior situation and posterior effects of economy, right or wrong approach might be determined. Changing money supply in the market could be an alternative, if not the contingent situation considered. Now go back to the current situation. There are two tools in monetary policy. One is interest rate changes, and the other one is money supply changes. The reason that the central bank now select interest rate hike is because money supply has been used up as policy tools for boosting up the economy for the sake of universal basic income, disaster relief fund, or supportive financing loan whatsoever. Economists had in unison suggested supportive fund targeted for the selected income group only, counting the possibility for another monetary tools in the future. If expanded money supply fail to return to normal, inflationary pressure cannot be controlled within so short a time, it could break out a stuck in the middle situation. Stability of the market price cannot be trusted among people, market transaction dwindles. Therefore, what's left now is interest rate changes. Moreover, affordable time to step up interest rate hike is not that much left. Extra burden will be heavier as time goes.
Now, Professor, the Bank of Korea often cites soaring household prices as one of the main drivers of rate hikes. So can you explain why higher rate hikes stop people borrowing against their homes or taking out new mortgages?
Interest rate hike stands for extra burden you have to pay for your debt. Abundant liquidity is the major cause of inflation rate and the rate hike. On the other side, abundant liquidity also be the source of market consumption and source of purchasing houses by way of a bank loan with lower interest rate than the higher growth of price increase. So what will you do when a rate of return is greater than the rate of borrowing cost? Bank loan was the major funding source, especially in Korea. In the property market, interest rate hike might be less and less affordable to borrow money from the bank, increasing cost of capital. In addition, the government made a restriction of the banking loan for purchasing real estate. Korea's outstanding household debt in the third quarter of last year was amount to 1,845 trillion won, and the debt is projected to break 1,900 trillion won in the first half of this year. By cutting liquidity and interest rate hike simultaneously, I think it is a right policy measure, and the government could make debt finance speculators twist and sell their houses in the market, decrease the overall price of real estate.
Okay, well, finally, in 2020, you could argue that most economists had the same view of what 2020 might look like with the outbreak of COVID-19. Pretty much the same for last year as well. But there seems to be two clear camps forming in regards for forecasts for this coming year, 2022. One side presenting a very rosy outlook, the other side saying, we're not quite out of the woods yet, don't get too optimistic. Which camp would you say you're in and why?
A few months ago, I thought I could see the silver lining of resilience of global economy. Korea will be expected 3.4% of economic growth. However, the advent of Omicron variant has changed a lot of our outlook into doomsday. Uncertainty remains in an economy due to supply chain bottleneck, battling already changed 3.1% target growth of economy, and then discouraging bouncing back trend of investment, production, and employment. The effect of COVID-19 pandemic could have calculated already and discounted as risk factors, but they cannot count the Omicron variant in the projection. In spite of this Omicron variant, I thought that 2022 will be a better year than 2021 with the help of a consumption recovery and the restoring distribution channel, and thus increasing inventories in the global market. In this respect, first half of 2022 will show a apparently brighter prospect for economic growth getting out of bottom, driven by semiconductor, automobile, and steel industries. What matters more is the latter half of 2022. It seems rather sluggish in economic cycle, in addition to financial uncertainties in the global market, unless otherwise inflation and the variant prolongs.
All right, Professor Oh, as always, thank you so much for your insights. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Saudi Arabia, the second stop of his week-long tour to the Middle East and Africa, met on Tuesday with the Saudi Crown Prince for talks on ways to boost bilateral cooperation. The South Korean leader also attended a business forum on smart growth. Our senior Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji files us this report from Riyadh.
South Korea and Saudi Arabia have agreed to expand the horizon of their cooperation to promising areas like the hydrogen economy. On Tuesday, President Moon Jae-in met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh.
President Moon said the two countries have been cooperating in 5 areas: energy, smart infrastructure, digitalization, healthcare, and SMEs. He expressed hope they can take cooperation in future industries like hydrogen energy, nuclear and defense, intellectual property, and medicine to the next level.
On the occasion of President Moon's visit, the two sides inked 4 MOUs related to hydrogen cooperation. One calls for jointly developing green hydrogen, which is produced from renewable energy sources. Another allows South Korea to secure supplies of hydrogen and ammonia from Saudi Arabia, while Seoul helps Riyadh construct hydrogen-powered vehicles and fueling stations. President Moon also expressed hope South Korea, which is highly competitive in terms of AI and big data, can take part in the construction of Saudi Arabia's mega project called NEOM Smart City. It's part of Riyadh's Vision 2030, a framework to reduce the kingdom's dependence on oil, diversify its economy, and develop its public sector. The Blue House said the leaders also discussed nuclear energy and weapons exports, with Prince Mohammed calling South Korea a good partner. Later in the day, President Moon attended a business forum where he said clean energy, future city construction, and healthcare are 3 key areas in which the two sides can work together. He stressed that cooperation in the hydrogen sector will be key in the carbon-neutral era.
사우디의 그린 수소와 블루 수소 생산 능력과 한국의 수소 활용 유통 능력을 결합한다면 양국은 함께 수소 경제를 선도할 수 있을 것입니다.
President Moon arrived in Riyadh Tuesday for a 2-day official visit. He was greeted at the airport by Prince Mohammed himself. The Blue House quoted the Crown Prince's office as saying it's a special case and reflects the importance of South Korea-Saudi relations.
Before wrapping up his trip on Wednesday, President Moon will meet with the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council to announce a resumption of free trade talks with the 6-member Gulf Group. It brings together Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Qatar, which account for 68% of South Korea's crude imports. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Riyadh.
Benchmark oil prices hit a 7-year high on Tuesday as supply disruptions after attacks in the Middle East added to an already tight supply outlook. Brent crude futures rose 1.2% to $87.50 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures jumped 1.6% to just over $85. Both benchmarks hit highs not seen since October 2014. Analysts expect oil inventories in OECD countries to fall to lows not seen since the year 2000 this summer, with Brent oil prices topping $100 a barrel later this year. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Geneva on Friday to discuss the tensions surrounding Ukraine. Confirming it on Tuesday, the State Department added the sit-down follows Blinken's recent trip to Ukraine and Germany to meet with the Ukrainian president as well as his foreign counterparts. The meeting, which comes as the Russian threat towards Ukraine continues to loom large, will be the first high-level meeting between Washington and Moscow since last week's lower-level diplomatic exchanges.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thank you, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight. Well, this Thursday marks 1 year since Joe Biden took office as the President of the United States, declaring to the world that America is back, marking an end to the Trump years of America First. Since then, he's rejoined multilateral climate action, held a huge summit on democracy, and has rounded up allies to confront China as its aggressive behaviour continues to disrupt and threaten security and economic interests. We take a look back at the first year of Biden's America and whether it's truly back at the head of the table, as President Joe Biden said, to lead global governance and for this, I am joined by Chae-Chung Kim, Professor at the Graduate School of International Studies at Sogang University, and Henry Olsen, Washington Post columnist and a Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And well, Professor Kim, let's start with you first. Now, it wasn't a quiet year in foreign policy for President Biden. There was the coup in Myanmar on February 1st last year, the rather undignified withdrawal from Afghanistan of US and NATO troops, as well as continued tensions with Beijing, Tehran and Moscow. Now, looking back at this year of Biden's America, what grade would you give Mr. Biden in handling these challenges? I know grading season's over for you now, but if I may.
Well, if you ask me to give him a letter grade, I mean, in terms of his foreign policy performances, I would probably give him A-. I'm not a generous grader, so I must tell you that A- is a decent grade. Not excellent, but still pretty good. I give him a good grade because President Biden has put in good faith efforts to restore American leadership in the world and retake moral high ground that President Trump had relinquished. It's true that withdrawal from Afghanistan could have been much smoother. You know, European allies should have been more properly consulted. But that said, I think the withdrawal was overdue. Nation building in Afghanistan was a lost cause. The international community was disappointed, not because of the decision to withdraw, but because of the manner in which the withdrawal was executed. I think withdrawal was necessary so that you could pivot more to Indo-Pacific, you know, the region that has become the most important to American national interests. China is the biggest foreign policy challenge to the United States. All in all, I think Biden is faring much better, is dealing with China more efficiently than was Trump. The U.S. has two important assets, strategic assets that are lacking in China, and they are the allies and the international institutions that the U.S. has established and maintained in the post-World War II era. And Trump failed to utilize these strategic assets in his fight against China. But Biden was able to resuscitate alliances and institutions. You know, you see many remnants of America First in Biden's foreign policy as well. Biden's trade policy is very protectionist. Biden is not really hurrying back to JCPOA with the Iranians, not really trying to, you know, mend the fences with the Cubans. But America's standing in the world is much higher than before when Trump was in White House. This is according to the most recent Pew research, and this is why I give his foreign policy A-, which is a pretty good grade for me.
Well, while Mr. Biden may have salvaged or maybe improved America's reputation around the world, countries around the world, they are still very mindful of the US's voters as domestic politics does influence its foreign policy. Mr. Olsen, 1 year into his presidency, Mr. Biden's approval rating, though, domestically, it's lower than his predecessors, except Mr. Trump's. How well do you think, and most Americans think that President Biden has managed foreign relations? Are Americans feeling that they are engaged and back to leading global governance?
Feelings about Biden's foreign relations are driven on partisan lines, that Republicans tend to give him bad grades throughout, regardless. I don't think that's necessarily fair. I don't think Biden has been a successful president, but I do think he's had a very successful foreign policy. And that's something that Americans, aside from Afghanistan, tend to appreciate. But it's so partisan here that virtually anybody who supported President Trump is cutting Biden very little slack. So even though he polls better on foreign policy than, say, on immigration or on the economy, he's still not doing as well as some of his predecessors because of that extreme partisanship.
And well, Professor Kim, you did touch upon this briefly, but many did hope that President Biden would bring US leadership back to the world and maybe reverse some of the America First policies that his predecessor introduced. But there seems to be a sense that there's not been any radical differences from Donald Trump's foreign policy, as you briefly mentioned. How are allied countries seeing this and also reacting to this?
Well, in fact, there are critical differences between President Biden and Trump. Biden thinks very highly of liberal, rule-based international order, and he understands how important it is to protect and strengthen that liberal order. Biden thinks very highly of allies and international institutions. And Biden also understands how important it is to engage the world with diplomacy. So there are critical differences, but it seems to me that these differences are sort of overshadowed by Biden's tough policy to China, which I think is equally tough as Trump's, if not tougher. Biden said a number of times that the U.S.-China relations are multidimensional in nature. He said that there is a dimension that is comparative, even adversarial, but there are dimensions that are also cooperative. He said he would see cooperation with Chinese in policies to fight against global warming and then COVID-19, but you don't really see cooperation taking place in these policies. In terms of methodology, I think there are some differences between Biden's China policy and then Trump's China policy, but the nature is pretty much the same. And as I said, also, America First is still very much intact in Biden's foreign policy. I mean, think about foreign policy for the middle class, which is one of the key slogans for Biden's foreign policy. Biden believes that the American foreign policy will have to put the interests of Americans, American middle class, before any other considerations. To me, this sounds very much like America First. The U.S.-China competition and America First, they are structural things, and there is a limit to which a new president can change when the constraints are structural in nature. And American allies, I think American allies should understand the structural nature of the problems that Biden is faced with.
Well, perhaps America is back, but on a different sort of capacity. But, well, Mr. Olsen, President Biden said that America, well, it is back, and he's again and again emphasized its leadership role in reinforcing multilateralism and democracy around the world. He's held many summits, from bilateral meetings to massive global conferences on climate change and democracy. So he's certainly talked the talk, but how can he really restore US credibility and prove to allies and the world that America is indeed back?
I think there's different questions about what it means to be back, in the sense that America is back when it engages in serious discussions with other countries and not in a give it or my way or the highway approach. I think America is back. Biden is doing that much more than President Trump ever did. But on the other hand, the fact is there are serious differences between many of America's allies. That America's allies in Europe, for example, don't see eye to eye on how to deal with the Russians in the Ukraine. They don't see eye to eye with America on how to deal with China. And there's no amount of American diplomacy that can eliminate those differences of opinion. You can only try and mediate them and perhaps minimize them. So if America is back means a return to the nearly unipolar American-led lockstep alliance era of, say, 2004 or maybe 1998, I don't think it's possible for America to return to that. The world has moved in a different direction, and it's wise for America to engage where the world is rather than where we wish it might be.
Ms. Rawson, well, it seemed that the Biden administration was very much gearing up to take China full on and move away from Russia and the Middle East. However, we've seen US officials rather preoccupied with Moscow and Tehran over the past year. Do you think Russia and Iran are going to be more of a threat right now than China?
I don't think that they are more of a threat to the United States. What they are is a threat to various alliance structures that we have posed, and they are currently more actively pushing the boundaries. I think that China remains the only nation that can genuinely threaten the United States. And as a result, that Biden's policies there, which I think are very wise and well executed, are essential. But we do have a global leadership and a global, not just a Pacific alliance structure. And that means when our allies in Europe or the Middle East feel threatened, we have to pay attention and we have to be involved. And I think that's why President Biden is spending that time now, while he's also still building an alliance that can secure against China's aggression.
And Professor Kim, there's increasing nervousness here in the Indo-Pacific surrounding the Taiwan Strait with growing tension and militarization in the area. Do you think that the United States and China, do you think that tensions might actually worsen to the point of war?
The tension, I think, is going to get worse over the Taiwan Strait because neither side is willing to back down. To China, Taiwan is all about nationalism. You know, Chinese constitution specifies that Taiwan is a part of China's territory. Therefore, it is the constitutional duty of Chinese leaders to annex Taiwan. There is also a lot at stake for the United States. If the U.S. fails to protect Taiwan, it's going to do great damage to American credibility, credibility of American defense commitments. On top of that, if Taiwan goes down, and that's going to be a significant blowback to liberal democracy that has been in retreat in past decades. If Taiwan goes, the first island chain, that important defense line will be disrupted. China can move eastward to Guam and even to Hawaii. The high sea in the Pacific is not safe. If Taiwan goes, the oil shipping lanes to South Korea and Japan can be in danger. So the U.S. is not going to back down over the Taiwan Strait. But that said, I'm not sure whether this tension will escalate to a war between the two countries because stakes are just too high. I think both countries will exercise extreme caution, but it's still possible for shots to be fired, shots to be exchanged over the Taiwan Strait because of miscalculations and misperceptions of the other's intentions, in which case the conflicts could really escalate to a full-blown war.
Well, Professor Kim, President Biden has 3 more years to go, and he's got his hands full, really, with a whole trolley of foreign policy issues, from countering China and Russia and Iran, and also handling Myanmar as well as Afghanistan to, trying to reinforce democracy and climate action. How do you think America's going to juggle with all these different issues, as well as the costs that arise from it and the responsibilities?
Well, it really sounds like an impossible job to me, to juggle with all these important issues. I think America will have to prioritize. I think it's very important for the U.S. to reorganize foreign policy priorities and use more resources so that it can deal with China in a more efficient manner, because the real challenge is coming from China, in my personal opinion. Now, the problem with the United States is that it has 2 hostile revisionist countries in Eurasia, not just one. These 2 countries, China and Russia, they are getting closer to each other because they have one common enemy, the United States. And there is a saying that your enemy's enemy is your friend. So that explains why China and Russia are getting closer to each other. But that said, their close relationship is a marriage of convenience. There is a strategic distrust that goes way back to the early Cold War period, years when they had borderline disputes. Maybe Biden will have to exploit that age-old distrust between these 2 countries. Maybe Biden will have to be a little bit more accommodating toward Putin's strategic concern about NATO's expansion so that the U.S. can concentrate more on China. Promoting democracy is important, but days of liberal interventionism is over, in my personal opinion. So you have to take good care of democracy at home. I think that's the best way to promote democracy. So in Myanmar and in Afghanistan, there is really a little you can do. I think Americans will have to prioritize because they have to work with limited resources.
And Mr. Wilson, what's your view on this? How is the US going to manage the huge list of foreign policy issues and the costs that come with it?
I think that Professor Kim is absolutely right, is that America is going to have to prioritize. And the fact is, whether we'll admit it or not, America is going to prioritize China. And the sooner our allies outside of the Pacific understand that, the sooner they will be able to adopt an appropriate strategy to meet their aims. The United States cannot continue to deal with China's rise and be the primary defense in the Middle East, and be the primary defense against Islamic terrorism, and be the primary defense against Russia. That's simply beyond America's capacity, given the strength of the countries involved. And so the United States will prioritize China. I think that's what the Biden policy really signifies, is that even when he had a political reason to try and distance himself from Trump, he actually doubled down on a more effective version of Trumpism in containing China. It is now a bipartisan commitment. I think that will deepen and continue, and the allies in the Pacific should welcome that, because it means our eyes will be regularly fixed on you, but our allies elsewhere may find it disconcerting.
Well, that was Chae-Tong Kim, Professor at the Graduate School of International Studies at Seogang University, and Henry Olsen, Washington Post columnist and a Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Thank you both so much for your time today.
LG Energy Solution, which makes batteries for electric vehicles, goes public next week on South Korea's main stock market, the benchmark Kospi. The firm is currently taking deposits from retail investors, and early demand indicates it will be the biggest IPO in the country's history. Our Min Suk-hyun reports.
A securities firm in Seoul is swarming with elderly investors seeking to bid for shares in one of the most anticipated initial public offerings of this year.
I don't really do this often, but this time I wanted to take part. Since I came all the way out here and it's so cold, I hope I can get at least one share.
Starting Tuesday, LG Energy Solution has been taking pre-order deposits from retail investors. And just an hour after its start, investors apparently placed more than $9 billion in deposits at 7 local brokerages. Demand was overwhelming throughout the day as investors put in over $27 billion in deposits. The competition for shares by individual investors was 20-1.
During its 2-day public subscription, the company plans to offer about 10.6 million to 12.7 million shares to retail investors. That's 25 to 30% of the total 42.5 million shares set for the IPO.
According to the company, 50% of those shares will be equally distributed among investors who have made bids for at least 10 shares, while the remaining 50% will be assigned proportionately. In its initial public offering this month, the world's second largest battery maker is expected to raise almost $11 billion, by far the country's biggest ever IPO. A total of 42.5 billion shares will be issued, and shares are priced at the top of their range at about $250 apiece. Upon listing, the company will be valued at around $59 billion. It will be the third biggest listed company on South Korea's main bourse Kospi after Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. Most of the funds from the IPO will be used to expand its battery manufacturing facilities, both home and abroad. The blockbuster IPO is set to take place next Thursday on January 27th. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Microsoft announced Tuesday that it's set to acquire Call of Duty maker Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion in cash, the largest deal in the sector. Microsoft's offer of $95 per share is actually 45% higher than the value when markets closed on Friday. The deal would also make the maker of the Xbox the third largest gaming company by revenue. According to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, the company is looking to push further into metaverse platforms through the acquisition. And despite the massive price tag, experts say it's a fair price.
I think that from Microsoft's perspective, they're getting a bargain because they're going to really vastly expand their library.
Microsoft has been making major investments in gaming in recent years, scooping up Minecraft maker Mojang Studios and ZeniMax in multi-billion-dollar deals. Despite Microsoft's takeover, Bobby Kotick will continue to serve as CEO of Activision Blizzard. Golden sand on Peru's coastline turned black on Sunday after an oil spill affected kilometers of shoreline. According to the country's environment minister, the oil spill occurred while a ship was supplying the La Pampilla refinery, affecting at least 2 kilometers of the country's central coast. While the Peruvian Agency for Environmental Assessment and Enforcement say it has begun an investigation to determine what caused the oil spill, some are blaming the recent high tides on the volcanic eruption in Tonga. 2 people have reportedly drowned off a beach in Peru due to massive waves felt in the aftermath of the eruption. According to a report released Tuesday by Amazon, a Brazilian environmental NGO, the area of rainforest destroyed in the Amazon last year reached 1,362 square kilometers. That's 17 times the size of Seoul. The area lost in 2021 is nearly 30% more than in 2020 and the largest since 2012. The NGO on its website warned that the destruction of the Amazon rainforest is causing serious consequences, including loss of biodiversity, threats to the survival of indigenous people, and worsening global warming. Some blame loose punishments for environmental crimes in the rainforest after President Jair Bolsonaro took office. According to recent data, penalties for environmental crimes in the Amazon rainforest fell from 688 cases from 2014 to 2018 to just 44 cases from 2019 to 2020. In response, an organization consisting of ecologists, scientists, and lawyers filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court against President Bolsonaro last year, accusing him of being responsible for the destruction of the rainforest. 이승재, 아리랑 뉴스.
Good morning. We are expecting rough winter weather with snow today. It is a freezing start across Korea. A cold warning, though, has been downgraded to an advisory, but still most inland areas are dealing with a very cold morning. And there is snow on the way. Snow will start from the capital this morning before gradually spreading to the rest of the country. Central regions are forecast to see heavy snow falling in the afternoon with a preliminary heavy snow advisory being issued. So let's try to avoid unnecessary travel and take public transportation instead today. Bundle up on your way out. Mostly sunny skies to start the day in southern provinces this morning, though. Highs in Seoul will only go up to sub-zero, and along with snow, the evening commute in the capital will be chaos. Southern provinces, however, will have highs that are slightly higher than yesterday afternoon. Temperatures will start to improve from tomorrow afternoon. Then we can really feel that much-awaited relief from Friday afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. Mark and I will be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Thursday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in. I'll be back with our next newscast at 10 a.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.